Megan specifically. So you were talking about how you had a lot of different fields that you were interested in, and then you weren't into computer science, and I can actually kind of relate to that. Do you use what you learned from those other fields in your research?
It depends on which fields, but yes, actually, I'm taking a robotics learning class right now that focuses on developmental robots, so robots that kind of learn about their own physical capabilities and learn how to understand the environment and different things, basically from the ground up. And actually, some of the things that I learned in anthropology and economics started showing up for doing readings that I've already done, like way back when in undergrad. So those things do come up a lot. I've used things, I published a paper in my first year in a collaboration with some aerospace engineers, and I actually ended up using a lot of those concepts as well in my work and basically smart building controls, and it turned out to be just like, you can synthesize a lot, it turns out. Yeah.
Okay, so another hand. Your name, please?
Carrie?
Hi, Carrie.
When do you decide which specific area of computer science you will do in graduate school?
Okay, so the question is, how and when did you decide what specific area to work in?
So that's usually research is, in general, it's not bound to a very specific area. You have a lot of freedom even if you're working with a specific professor. So the only requirement that I had is that in my research was that I had to, if I wanted to build something, it had to work. Basically, I could not do it in simulations. But usually it varies a lot by school. When I was admitted into grad school, I immediately went and started working with Dina, who is my current professor now. In other schools, I think some of my friends, for example, went to Princeton. First they do a rotation, and after the rotation they decide. So that really depends on the school to a very large extent.
Yeah, actually, I mean, like, personally, how do you decide, like, which area are you doing?
Research is about opportunities, right? I mean, when I started working on seeing through walls, I was not working on seeing through walls. I was working on making Wi-Fi faster between different nodes. So in research, you really want to think about what is an interesting problem for you to pursue. But then you also don't want to keep thinking forever, because then you might never stumble upon something that excites you enough. So you talk to your advisor, you talk to other people, you see something that is sort of valuable and that is sort of interesting to you at some point in time, and gradually you converge to something that really, really excites you.
So I started off in theory and ended up completely in a field that involves soldering things.
For me, some soldering in theory, right?
So
carrying code, like how you carry code without soldering.
Connect it together, right? So for me, so theory, it turns out, is very isolated work. And I thought that I would be totally down for that. Like, that would be super fun. I would just sit there and think about algorithms and graph theory and all the time, and it would be great. I actually worked for, I graduated in the winter, and so I worked before I came to school, and I worked in a sensor network company, and I realized that I missed working as a part of a team when I came to grad school, and just sitting here in this office and trying to think, everyone in that office just sat in silence and kind of looked at paper like all day, and I was like, I can't do this for the rest of my life. And so the actual experience, because I have broad interests, I could be interested in a lot of different things, and so what came down for me was the kind of environment that I wanted to work in. So now I work in a lab where there's a lot of other people going on, there's a lot of collaboration, and I get to work with my hands, which I started doing a lot as like a hobby while I was doing theory, and then I had all these ideas, and basically I just decided to turn my hobby into my research. So that was what did it for me. It came down to how I wanted to be living my life and the kind of work lifestyle, as it were, that I wanted to have.
As for me, I kind of ended up, the first time I applied to grad school, I applied in computer graphics. I did a lot of undergrad research in image processing. I'd taken computer graphics and I thought it was really interesting, but I was really unprepared for what grad research in computer graphics was. So once I started, I realized that it wasn't really for me. And so at the same time, I interned for various financial services companies. And so I realized that problems in finance were really fascinating to me. I thought it was a really fast-paced environment. It has a lot of interesting real-world applications. And so that's why I transferred, because I kind of felt that there were a lot of interesting problems to be explored within finance. And then I specifically ended up exploring high-frequency trading type questions after I started at University of Michigan because my advisor was also interested in those sorts of broader questions as well.
Yes, Michelle.
So to what extent has funding and business interests affected the trajectory of your research?
The questions on funding and business affecting your research.
So I can answer 0. You have so much flexibility, and usually if you're working on something which you can get your advisor excited about, your advisor, usually they have a grant, but it's not like the entire grant needs to go to one very specific project. It's for a bunch of projects, and they use these grants, it's like the same way companies work, right? When they have a surplus of money, they use it to explore new areas, and this is exactly the same way research works. So that's for me. I don't know about you guys.
So it's funny that you asked that, because the event that I just came from was an annual review of this giant grant that we're all on, where we presented all the research we've done the last year to our industry and DARPA funders. And so I have to say that also I think that the funding doesn't actually affect the kind of research that you do. I mean, it affects how you pitch it once a year. But ultimately, I mean,
So
What Megan's trying to say is that because the research is so relevant, she doesn't need to.
They actually saw this because they're like, Internet of Things became a big thing, and so now all of your research is extremely relevant. It's really great. By and large, academia has this amazing, like, just there's an amount of freedom to choose what you want to do that is just unbound anywhere else.
I think there is one caveat to be said though, that it does differ depending on different areas and different projects and all that, so that doesn't necessarily hold true. In my area, it's also not, there's zero effect. In fact, in my area, if you take funding from a trading firm, they'll be like, why are you doing, like, your research shows that HFT is good? Oh, that's no wonder.
Yeah, maybe I'll just chime in a little bit since I'm on the other side and I often raise funds so that my students don't have to worry about it. I prefer to allow the students to think as purely as they can about research and not have to worry about where the money's coming from, and then it's sort of my job to make sure that I can translate what they're doing into the actual sponsored items. So although they might think that, in reality, their advisor is likely working behind the scenes to explain exactly why it's meeting the sponsor's needs. But I think most faculty are pretty effective. In some sense, we are salespeople, we are marketers to some degree, because we are disseminating our research. But the students are at this, I feel like I missed the golden age where I could just focus only on research, but you always have an opportunity in the future to worry about money. Other questions? In the back. I'm sorry, your name again?
Amy?
Amy.
Do you have advice on navigating the timelines of industry versus graduate schools? Because I know a lot of my friends are signing offers for big name tech companies now, whereas they wouldn't hear back from graduate schools until the spring.
I have absolutely no idea. After undergrad, I can't grad school, so I'm useless on this question.
And I always intended to go to grad school, and so for me, the industry experience that I have is basically just filling the time until then. I mean, it became this amazing thing that led to where I am now, but yeah, I actually don't have much experience navigating the offer timeline.
So in my experience, some of my friends have done this kind of navigation, and you can always try to defer. If you get accepted to grad school, you can try to defer for a year. You can always, there's always, it depends really on the school, depends on how much you really want to stay in the job. And maybe some of my friends, after they choose to go into industry, they don't end up going back to grad school. So it's really kind of up to you at first.
Yeah, it'll likely vary on the school. I know some schools that will automatically accept deferment requests, but they also have to look at the numbers. If they received 100 deferment requests, they're not going to grant them all. And I also know students who tried to defer for 2 years, and they were told, well, thank you very much, but you feel free to apply again. So there are limits to it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Aaron, so I'll kind of go off that and echo the Piazza question that I think Kevin mentioned. What was like the impetus for you to go to grad school at what point I see something in your undergraduate career? or something? What was that thing that you knew you were going to grad school?
Why did you go to grad school?
I don't know if people are gonna like this answer. I knew I wanted to get a PhD from MIT in high school. So I had a very specific goal.
You were overseas in high school?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not causal though.
What?
I wanted to do research. Both of my parents were trained as scientists, and one of the first things I remember doing actually was kind of exaggerating illnesses when I was in elementary school, because then my mom would have to take me into her lab and I get to look in the microscopes and see all the things she was studying. And Feynman is, I really enjoy Feynman. He's one of the folks I look up to on some things. So I mean, for me, that was just a part of the culture and values that I grew up with, and I really enjoyed doing research in undergrad, even though I didn't have a lot of CS research experience when I graduated.
So I guess for me, computer science maybe kind of runs in my blood. So everyone in my immediate family has a computer science degree. My dad is a computer science professor. My twin sister just finished her PhD in computer science. So I was actually very resistant to the idea of going into computer science or going to grad school at all for a really long time. I really wanted to be different than the rest of my family. But then
Make an offer you can't refuse.
I joined the family. So I felt for me it was just that, so I'd gone to grad school, I was in another PhD program and I was considering dropping out because I wasn't really interested in the research. But then I did so I had to do a master's thesis to graduate with a master's degree from that other institution. And in doing so, I really actually got the chance to understand what doing research on my own was like, doing independent research where you really get to solve some really interesting, challenging problems, and I realized that was exactly what I wanted to do. Like, research was really exciting. I could do that every single day for the rest of my life, and I'd be very happy. And that's what ultimately convinced me to continue on with grad school.
Next question. Oh, in the front, your name, please.
Yeah, Annie, here's a quick question. How did you choose the advisor that you currently work with?
How did you choose your advisor? Okay.
So I can start. So the way it started for me is it started with the internship. So what I did is I was interested in, I looked up different professors at MIT, and I was interested in the research of 5 of them, and I sent out an email, and one of them replied to me, and who was actually the person I was most interested in. So it was like, what are the few courses that I was excited about as an undergrad? And after I came here, I really liked whatever I was working on, and then I decided to join the same group for grad school.
For me, I was in the middle of this hard period where I was writing my NSF fellowship applications. And for that, you have to talk about your research experience, what drives you as a person, what you care about, and then also write a research proposal for what you would like to do in the next few years. And I was having the hardest time with this. I really didn't enjoy what I was doing, and I had this sort of basically, I was making all these little devices and had all these hobby things. And I got to know my current advisor's students first, because they got to know me while I was going through this NSF process. And then they found out about all these little things that I was making, and they were like, why don't you work for us? Or with our advisor. And so I went and I had a meeting with him, and he pitched me his vision of the future, and it was so compelling that I was like, that is what I want to do. And so that's how I ended up working with him.
So as for me, I had applied to Michigan knowing specifically that I wanted to work with my advisor that was the only person I wanted to work with at Michigan, just because he did a lot of research that was also in my area in terms of being both at finance and computer science. So in terms of ultimately deciding on going to Michigan, I talked to a lot of the other students working with my advisor when I was visiting Michigan, and they were really what convinced me, just because they spoke really highly of him, and it seemed like it was a very collaborative environment where a lot of them worked together on projects, and it was very supportive, and I just really liked that environment. I could see myself working there and with this advisor, so that's why I did it.
Oh yes, Jessica.
Yeah. How common or uncommon is it to find interdisciplinary research?
All right. So interdisciplinary research, easy or hard?
Okay, so there's really two parts of this question. One is how easy is it to be able to work on interdisciplinary research, and two is how good, what is it good or is it not good to work on interdisciplinary research? I think the vast majority of research today that is like cutting edge research, in order for it to be cutting edge, is interdisciplinary. So a lot of the things that you guys saw today, almost no one worked is like, oh, all I want to work on is I wanted to research the input that I'm getting from medical devices. No, right? What Kevin was saying is like, okay, so there's these medical devices, and there's like security, and how do these two things come together? For example, from my experience, the research was, okay, wireless signals. That is what's like, I started with wireless networking, and now I'm working on getting people's vital signs using wireless signals. So it's easy to be able to work on interdisciplinary research if you get an idea or if you're excited about anything. How good or bad that is, that really depends on what you want to do after grad school. So it's a early question to ask, because when you're going on assume if you want to become a professor, when you're going to go on the academic job market, they are going to hire you for doing under some umbrella. And if you're under multiple umbrellas, it could become tricky about under which umbrella you're going to be under. And so, because this would depend on who would push for you for the hire. But that is like a question which you probably don't need to worry about at this point.
That is true, though. I have seen it come up during discussions on faculty hiring. But for me, I've done a lot of interdisciplinary research, and for me, I have no problem going up to random people's offices and just talking to them about the ideas that I've been having recently, or issues or problems that I'm trying to tackle. So there's a lot of places where interdisciplinary mixing obviously isn't built into the infrastructure due to like physical embodiment issues, different buildings, or different organizational structures. Maybe you don't run into them as often. But if you take the initiative and you go out and you just drop in on somebody and say, hey, can we talk about this cool thing I've been thinking about, then there's a lot of things that can come out of that.
Yeah, to echo Megan, I think that's a really good point. Like, you really have to just be proactive, and you can really find opportunities. For instance, for me, I took a finance PhD class, I took a law class, and a law professor and now a finance professor are both on my committee, and I've worked with them in terms of my research.
So what is the worry? Why did you ask this question?
Oh, I'm a double major in economics and computer science, so I actually don't know which one I want to pursue more at this point.
I see. But I think if you look at her, it's sort of...
Yeah, the computer science.
I think the answer to that, but you might be doing the same research in both places, right? And you might be co-advised. The answer is, what is the group that you want to be surrounded by while you are doing this research? I really like the computer science graduates over here. They're super smart people. I cannot say something without like thinking twice before I say it, because then they're gonna attack me So that is, for example, that is why I would choose computer science, but maybe you would want to choose economics for whatever other reason.
As somebody who in undergrad was in economics and then transferred into computer science, that was the biggest thing that made me do that, is that the CS students were so cool and so fun to be around. They're wonderful.
But maybe I'll just do a meta comment. I think there could be selection bias, but one of the important things to take away is that everybody has sort of a different approach and different ways to enjoy life and research. So what works for one person might not work for another. So what each candidate really needs to think about is, what do you as a person enjoy? And then find out which sort of receptor works best. So for our 3 students, obviously computing was just the hands down right answer for them. And maybe it always is, but I'm sure if you talk to someone in another discipline, they'll have a different perspective, and they may have joined another discipline for some other component. Yes, your name, please.
Margaret, again.
Oh, yeah.
What do you guys see yourself doing after grad school? Do you want to teach or do something else, or what?
So, this is a bad question. So, from my perspective, would like to see myself in one of two or both places. I would either like to be an academic because I love doing research. I love the inventive part and I love the freedom of thinking that you get in academia. And I think this is really hard to get outside of any research environment. And the other thing which I really like is startups, because whatever you thought of, this freedom of idea that wherever you got, you can translate it into an impact on people's everyday lives. So either of these is a lot of impact, right? You either impact how people think, or you could impact how people lead their lives, and ideally you would be able to do both. So that's my answer.
So for a while I wasn't sure. I thought that I would be happy going and becoming a professor, or maybe also doing a startup or something like that. And then I attended an event at a conference where we had presenters who had made it, through their careers. And there were people who had done great research as research professors, and then there was also this lady who had done amazing sensor-based research at Intel Research. And the lady from Intel Research had a lot of freedom, but she still had to justify all of her research projects to Intel as something that could result in monetary, basically benefits for the company. And it was also very difficult for her to assemble an interdisciplinary team because she had to justify why they needed to hire each particular hire from just a different field. And for me, because I do such interdisciplinary stuff, and one of the things that I like the most is just going and talking to people in random other fields just about what they're doing. Being a professor, I was like, then I want to stay in academia. And one thing that I've noticed is that professors can do all the things. Academia is sort of centrally positioned so that you can also have a startup, you can influence industry, you can collaborate with industry, you also get to go and collaborate with policymakers. So professors get to do everything. I mean, I don't know, is that fairly accurate? That's been my impression so far.
Yeah, we can do everything, every waking moment and more.
And now the hard part becomes how do you decide as a professor once you become a professor? How do you decide what your priorities are? How do you make sure that you're not overcommitting yourself? But as a professor, you have so many options, and you can do anything that you want. So yeah, there's this paralysis involved as well. And so what do I do since I can do anything? But I am really excited about that.
So I guess that's a difficult question for me to answer. I'm about a year from graduating, so I think at this point my answer changes every single week or every single day. So I think the things I've interned in finance, I've interned in software, I've interned most recently for a government agency doing research, and all of those options have been some things I've been considering, and I guess I'm just maybe complaining about having too many options. I think that's a great thing about being a computer science grad student, is that you really do have these options. Your skills are really valuable in all sorts of different areas, and the world is yours, so you really can choose all sorts of things.
We have time for a question or two.
I'm actually interested in knowing why not. Like we've been saying why yes, why it works for us, why we love to go, why for me it's a no-brainer. Like yeah, definitely PhD in computer science. I meet amazing people, we interact with people who have had startups and sold them for $1 billion+, with professors who have changed how people think around the world, with industry who want us to solve or help them solve the main problems. I'm interested in hearing why not. Like, what are the other options, and why are these options better from your guys' perspective? It's okay, I'm not gonna judge you.
I mean, there's just a couple things. There's a few things that I know I don't want to do. One of them is working 9 to 5 in a job where I'm in a cubicle by myself. Just does not seem appealing to me. And the other is that there's just certain businesses that I don't agree with. Like I don't want to work for a defense contractor because I'm not supportive of the military. I don't want to work for Facebook because I don't like exactly what social networks are doing to people in general. And I want to try to find a way to apply computer science electrical engineering, which is something that I'm good at and enjoy doing, in a way that benefits the world. So I'm looking into research because of that, because it doesn't necessarily go towards profit all the time, although I understand that it has to in order for it to receive funding. But really the background is to find some problem and fix it and to benefit the world in this way.
Yeah, so the other question is, why would you not want to go?
So research?
Into computer science
It's
research.
computer science.
Yes.
And I mean, those are the reasons, because I'm afraid I'll end up in one of those jobs that, like, while they pay well, and that's what a lot of people are looking for, they're not fulfilling what, like, I want to be. So, I mean, that's like, my own reasons. I don't know, were you asking us a question, or did you want me to ask you a question?
I mean,
That was a comment.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, so I've heard that if you are interested ultimately in going into industry, when you graduate, you have to realize that you're basically, you basically spent 5 years not acquiring the skills that everyone else has been acquiring for 5 years. So you're competing against people who have 5 years of industry experience where you have 0, and you probably haven't spent your time learning the latest hot new technology specific that people are using to develop. And that's one of the biggest downsides I've heard. There are some industry jobs where having a PhD actually helps. If you are interested in machine learning and you want to go work for a big company, then you should get a PhD if you ever want to lead a project. Is what I've heard from friends of mine who've gotten masters and gone into industry. But other than that, if your plan ultimately is industry, then it is oftentimes a smarter decision to not go for the PhD if you can get by without one. That's one of them.
Yeah, I want to add just a little bit to that, because I actually work in industry, sort of in my other job, Microsoft Research. So one thing I would say is that, and this is oh, well, thank you for, it's like a senior game with
This is totally right.
Yeah, exactly. Feel right at home. Yeah, so one thing I would say though is that, and just to be sort of crude about it, like one concern a lot of people have is like the money. Right? And I'm not going to lie about that. I don't think that's sort of a bad concern to have, particularly if you have like student debt or things like that. Yeah, exactly. Can I see what your fruits on now? Yeah. We see you later tonight, okay? That's cool, man. It's true friendship in academia. So yes, I mean, money is sort of a natural concern that people have. And that's one reason why, like, if you come talk to me afterwards, I believe in being very frank about, sort of what, the various salaries are for various jobs. I think people should just be open about that. So a lot of misinformation about that. And what I always tell people, though, is that if you can afford it financially, and if you don't have, let's say, family situations or things that will prevent you from doing this, I think you should try to at least get a master's. Okay? Because what a lot of the research shows is that actually will sort of, for the amount of time that you put into it, typically another year, year and a half out of undergrad, that will typically maximize your overall lifetime earnings. Right? So I'm saying, just to be sort of blunt about that. Now, if you get the PhD, right, you will essentially be poorer from some long set of time after you get out of undergrad, right? But then once you get out, then you will make more money than people who have master's degrees, right? But if sort of the money is the main thing, I still think that going to grad school, at least for a master's degree, is a great idea. Because like we were saying over here, there's this issue of competitiveness, right? So you get out of undergrad, right? You have an undergrad degree, which is great. Right? But you're competing against other people who have more years of experience. So typically you're going to start more at the bottom of sort of the corporate, totem pole if you decide to go that route. But even just having a master's degree, you will start off with more interesting jobs. I've at least seen that at Microsoft and Facebook and my friends at Google and so on and so forth. So that's just the one thing I would say there. If you want to talk more about salaries or sort of like initial jobs you can get with different degrees, come talk to me. But I would really encourage everyone to at least get that master's degree.
Just a second, I also heard the same thing. Master's degree basically maximizes your earnings versus time spent in school. The one thing is that it costs money to get a master's degree, where a PhD, they generally pay you to go get your PhD. So it might be a good plan too to go work for a company and see if they will fund your master's. That's often an option that I've seen as well.
So unfortunately, we're going to have to end the questions because we have all the one-on-one appointments that begin in 1 minute. And we don't want to, you only have 15 minutes per appointment, so we don't want to have you lose that time. So I know there are lingering questions. I encourage you to ask them on Piazza. If you're uncomfortable asking in your own name, you can always post anonymously, but we'd be glad to take your questions there. We also welcome any feedback. But I would like to at least give a hand to the students and the other panelists who joined.